My mother said I was family even though I was adopted, but she only remembered me when she needed money. If you'd met my mother in a grocery store, you'd think she was the nicest woman alive. She does that smile where her eyes crinkle like she's sharing a secret with you, and she asks about your day like she actually cares. People love her. People have always loved her. I used to think that meant I was the problem, like maybe my settings were wrong and everyone else had the right version of her. I was adopted when I was little. I don't remember the paperwork or the blessing speeches or whatever adults tell themselves to feel heroic. I remember the feeling of being held, the smell of clean laundry, the safety of having a room with a door that closed. For a few years, it was fine. Not magical, not movie perfect, but fine. They fed me, they tucked me in, they took pictures of me doing basic kid stuff and acted like it mattered. And then my mother got pregnant. I didn't even fully understand what that meant at first. I just knew everyone started talking like the house was holding its breath. Suddenly, there were doctor appointments and little lists on the fridge and grown-ups whispering like I was asleep even when I wasn't. My father would come home with this nervous excitement in his face, like he'd been waiting his whole life for a thing and it was finally happening. I was 5, and I was already learning a lesson I didn't know how to name. Some love comes with conditions you never agreed to. When my sister was born, it was like someone turned the lights off in my part of the house and then acted surprised I couldn't see. They weren't cruel in a dramatic way. They were worse. They were distracted. They were obsessed with her in a way that made me feel like a spare piece that came with the package. My mother would hold her and stare at her like she'd won something. My father started calling her our miracle. Nobody called me that. Nobody ever called me anything like that. I tried so hard to be helpful. I'd bring diapers. I'd stand there with my little hands out like, "Want me to do something?" And my mother would go, "Not now, sweetie," without looking at me. Without, "Sweetie." Like a label you put on a box so you don't have to open it. The first time I heard my mother tell someone, "We were lucky enough to be able to adopt," she said it like it was a hobby, like a little fun thing they did before they had their real child. I was sitting right there, on the living room floor, playing with a toy that had already lost pieces. I remember thinking, okay, so this is the new story. This is how I'm going to be talked about. Not as a daughter, as a warm-up. By the time I was in elementary school, the pattern had set like wet cement. My sister would breathe and my parents would clap. She'd draw a stick figure and my mother would tape it to the fridge like it was a museum piece. I would bring home a good grade and it would land on the counter next to the mail. "Nice," my father would say, already turning away, like the word had no weight. I learned fast that if I wanted attention, I had to make it useful. I became the kid who noticed things, the kid who put her own dishes away without being asked, the kid who didn't cause stress. I hate that phrase. I hate it so much. My mother loved telling people how independent I was. She said it like it was a compliment. It wasn't. It was a coping mechanism. When I did try to ask for anything emotional, it never went well. If I cried, my mother would get this tight look and say, "You're being dramatic." If I got angry, she'd go, "I don't know why you're like this." Like I was an appliance that came broken. Meanwhile, my sister could throw a tantrum and my parents would brainstorm ways to make her life easier. "She's sensitive," my father would say. Okay. And what was I? A concrete block? My sister grew up knowing she was the center. She didn't even have to be mean on purpose at first. She just absorbed the message that I was extra, that I was lucky to be there, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps fell off the table. She'd take my stuff and my mother would go, "Just let her have it, it's not a big deal." It was always not a big deal when it was my feelings. I used to stare at family photos and try to see myself the way other people did. There I was, smiling, because I knew pictures were important. My mother would post them on a social media app and people would comment heart emojis and call us a beautiful family. I'd read those comments like they were about somebody else, like I was a guest who happened to be in the frame. The worst part? I kept hoping. Even when I told myself I wasn't. Even when I pretended I didn't care. I kept doing things that were basically emotional audition tapes. Look, I'm easy. Look, I'm helpful. Look, I'm lovable. I didn't realize how humiliating that was until I was older. By the time I hit my teen years, I stopped trying to win them. Not in a brave, empowering way. More like, I got tired. Like my body finally understood it was running on empty. I started staying after school. Joining clubs, volunteering, taking any excuse to be out of the house. My parents didn't notice. That should tell you everything. High school was when I got good at pretending. I could laugh at dinner, answer questions, do my chores, and keep my heart locked up like it was contraband. I'd go to my room and blast music through cheap headphones and imagine a life where I didn't feel like I was constantly asking permission to exist. My sister, of course, did great. Sports, friends, attention, the whole thing. Teachers loved her. Parents of other kids loved her. My mother loved being the mom of the star. She'd sit in the bleachers and talk about my sister like she was giving a press conference. If someone asked about me, my mother would go, "Oh, Marisol is more quiet." And then she'd pivot right back to my sister. I had this one art teacher who actually saw me. She'd look at my drawings like they mattered, and she'd say stuff like, "You have a voice." I didn't even know what that meant. I just knew I felt less invisible in her classroom. She encouraged me to apply for scholarships and programs and anything that could get me out. At home, none of that landed. I remember telling my parents I got into a small summer program in another town. It wasn't glamorous. It was just a chance to be around people who cared about the same things I did. My father looked up from his plate and went, "How much does it cost?" That was his whole reaction. My mother said, "We'll see." In that tone, that means no. They didn't even ask what the program was. My sister walked in 2 minutes later and announced she made a team, and suddenly we were having dessert and everybody was clapping. I sat there chewing like a robot, wondering how a person can be so present and still not be seen. I started saving money in secret, not for anything dramatic, just survival. I babysat. I did little jobs for neighbors. I took cash and hid it inside an old notebook like I was in some low-budget spy movie. I know, it sounds ridiculous, but when you grow up feeling disposable, you start planning escape routes early. By the time I turned 18, I didn't make a big announcement. I didn't slam doors. I didn't give a speech. I packed my stuff into a couple bags, loaded my car, and left for a city a few hours away where I'd been accepted to a state college. My mother hugged me at the door and said, "Make good choices," like I was going off to commit crimes. My father patted my shoulder like I was a co-worker. My sister barely looked up from her phone, and I drove away with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, because for the first time, the air felt like it belonged to me. College wasn't some fairy tale glow-up. I didn't walk onto campus and instantly become a new person. I was still me. I still flinched when people raised their voices. I still apologized too much. I still felt guilty when someone did something nice for me, like I needed to pay it back with my organs. But I had space. I had distance. I had a little room with a cheap bed and a desk and a roommate who didn't know my family history, and that alone felt like medicine. I worked the whole time. Food service, campus offices, random gigs. It was exhausting, but it was mine. I paid my rent. I bought my own groceries. I learned how to fix things because there was nobody to call who would do it for me. Honestly, that part was empowering and also annoying. I wanted to be the kind of girl who could call her dad when her sink leaked. Instead, I watched videos online and cried on the floor once, then fixed it anyway. I kept contact with my parents because I thought that's what you do, not because it made me feel good. Holidays were this weird performance where my mother acted like we were close, and my father nodded along, and my sister floated around like she was doing charity work by being in the same room as me. I'd go back to my apartment afterward and feel like I'd been holding my breath for days. After college, I got a steady job in an office. Nothing fancy, just stable. I liked the predictability. I liked getting paid on schedule. I liked being able to buy my own furniture without asking permission. I built a life that was quiet and normal and mine. I made friends. I went to a coffee shop and became a regular. I had routines that didn't include walking on eggshells. And then I met my boyfriend. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the kind of guy who tried to impress people with big stories or fake confidence. He was steady. He listened. He'd ask questions and actually wait for the answer. The first time I told him something about my family, I braced myself for the usual reactions, either disbelief or pity. Instead, he just said, "That sounds painful." Like he wasn't trying to fix it. He was just acknowledging it. I cried in my car afterward because apparently basic empathy is my weakness. We dated for 2 years before we got engaged. And yes, I was terrified. Not because of him, because of the idea of joining families, the idea of making things official, the idea of my parents acting weird at a wedding and ruining it. My boyfriend promised we could do whatever made me feel safe. We could keep it small. We could elope. We could skip family drama. He said it like he meant it. So imagine my confusion when, out of nowhere, my mother started calling me. Like, calling. Not just a holiday text. Not just a birthday message that felt copied and pasted. Actual calls. Actual questions. Actual interest. At first I thought someone was dying. I'm not even kidding. That's how rare it was. My mother's new obsession was my sister's upcoming wedding. Apparently, my sister was engaged now, too. I didn't even know she was dating anyone seriously. That tells you how close we were. My mother called and said, "We need you involved." Need, not want. Need. Like I was a tool in a drawer they'd forgotten and suddenly remembered. I tried to play it cool. I was like, "Oh, okay, what kind of involvement?" And my mother did this little laugh and said, "Don't be weird. You're family." That word hit me like a slap. Family. Where was that word when I was a kid? Where was it when I was eating dinner in silence while they praised my sister for existing? My fiancé, sweet, optimistic man, was like, maybe this is a chance for healing. Bless him, truly. But also, no. I told him I'd consider it. I told myself I'd go in with boundaries. I told myself I wouldn't get my hopes up. Spoiler, I got my hopes up anyway, because I'm a human being and I wanted it. And I wanted to be wanted. So I said yes. I said I'd help. And suddenly I was getting invited to things. Calls about venues, messages about colors and flowers and schedules. My mother started hugging me when I visited, which was so disorienting it made my skin buzz. My father started saying stuff like, "We're proud of you," which felt like he was reading from a script. Even my sister started texting me, calling me sis, like we were in some wholesome movie. I should have noticed how fast it all flipped. I should have noticed the way my mother kept emphasizing how important it was that everything go smoothly. I should have noticed my sister's sweetness had this sharp edge to it, like she was smiling with her teeth clenched. But I was starving. Emotionally. I was so hungry for belonging that I ate whatever they offered. The planning meetings were mostly me doing work while my sister made dramatic faces and my mother fluffed her ego. I'd call vendors, compare quotes, read contracts, keep track of payments. My sister would show up late and complain about details like the chairs weren't cute enough. My mother would laugh and say, "She's a perfectionist." No, she's spoiled. Call it what it is. Then the money requests started. At first it was small. "Can you cover this deposit? We'll pay you back next week." And I had the money, and it felt nice to be useful, so I did it. Then it was bigger. "The venue needs the next payment today." Then, "The photographer won't hold the date without the full amount." Then, "The caterer is raising prices if we don't lock it in." My sister would text me these breathless, urgent messages like the world would end if I didn't send the money in the next hour. And I'd do it. Again and again. My fiancé asked if I was comfortable with it, and I said yes, because admitting I was being played felt like admitting I was still that little girl trying to buy love with good behavior. Sometimes I'd get a tiny stab of doubt. Like, why aren't my parents handling this? Why is my sister acting like she has no access to her own bank account? But then my mother would call and say, "You're saving the day," and my chest would swell like I'd finally earned my seat at the table. That's the embarrassing part. I didn't just get tricked. I participated. Because I wanted the fantasy. A couple weeks before the wedding, I realized a lot of contracts were in my name. Not because I insisted, but because it was easier. Vendors wanted a single point of contact. My sister would forget to answer calls. My mother would say she was overwhelmed, so it became me. I was the organizer, the coordinator, the person who got the emails, the person whose card was on file. It made me feel weird, but I kept telling myself it was temporary. I kept telling myself I'd get reimbursed. I kept telling myself I wasn't being naive. Then my sister asked to meet me alone. We met at a coffee shop. Not a chain, just a small place with mismatched chairs and music a little too loud. My sister showed up in a cute outfit and acted nervous, like she was about to confess something heartfelt. I remember thinking, maybe she's going to apologize. Maybe she's going to say she knows we've never been close and she wants to change that. I know. I'm cringing too. She sat down, looked at me with this fake softness, and said, "I need to talk to you about the wedding." I smiled, like an idiot, like a hopeful little puppy. And she said, "I don't think you should come." I swear my brain went blank, like someone unplugged it. I just stared at her. She kept talking like she was explaining a schedule conflict. She said it would confuse people. She said guests might ask questions about why I didn't look like my parents. She said she didn't want awkward conversations at her wedding. She said she wanted real family only. Real family only. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I felt my hands go cold. I wanted to flip the table. I also wanted to disappear. That's the thing about old wounds. They don't just hurt, they drag you back. I said, "Are you serious?" And she shrugged like I was being dramatic. She actually said, "Don't take it personal. Don't take it personal." Like she wasn't basically telling me I was a stain. I asked if my parents knew. She said yes, obviously, and that they agreed it was for the best. She said my mother was worried I'd get emotional and make it about me. Which, okay. First of all, it is about me when you use my money and then uninvite me like a nuisance. Second of all, yes, I was emotional, because I'm not a robot. I left without finishing my drink. I sat in my car and shook. Not cute shaking, ugly shaking. Like my body was trying to eject itself. When I got home, my fiancé took one look at my face and knew something happened. I told him everything in this frantic, messy burst. I expected him to be calm and wise. Instead, he got angry in a way I'd never seen. He said, "They used you." He said it like a fact, not a debate. And that made me cry harder because hearing it out loud made it real. That night, I opened my laptop and started reading contracts. Not like a desperate kid, like a woman who finally realized she had power. My name was on those agreements. My card paid those deposits. If I wasn't family enough to attend, I sure as hell wasn't an ATM. So I started canceling. I didn't do it in a dramatic revenge montage way. I did it like how normal people do scary things. With a pit in my stomach and a mug of cold coffee and a voice in my head going, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?" I called the venue first. I was polite. I asked about the cancellation policy. The person on the phone sounded tired, like she'd heard every kind of family nonsense. She confirmed the contract was under my name. She confirmed the remaining balance hadn't been paid yet. She confirmed I could cancel. There was a fee. I didn't care. I said, cancel it. Then I called the caterer. Same thing, the decorator, the person handling the chairs and linens, the photographer. One by one, I canceled. Some fees were non-refundable. Some deposits were partially refundable. I kept track in a spreadsheet like I was at work because if I let myself feel all the feelings, I would have thrown up. Part of me felt guilty, like I was ruining my sister's wedding. And then I'd remember her face, calm and smug, telling me not to come. And the guilt would burn off into something sharper. I wasn't ruining anything. I was refusing to bankroll my own humiliation. I didn't tell my family, not at first. I wanted them to find out the way I found out I didn't belong. Suddenly, painfully, with no warning. It took less than a day for the calls to start. My mother's first voicemail was this high-pitched panic where she kept saying my name like it was a spell. Then she called again, and again, and again. My sister sent me messages that started with, "What did you do?" and escalated into screaming paragraphs full of blame and insult. My father texted a single line, "Call your mother," like I was 12. I didn't answer. I sat on my couch, my phone buzzing, and I felt this weird calm, like my body was finally aligning with my decisions. Like the part of me that had been trying to earn their love was taking a nap, and the adult part was steering. Eventually, I picked up when my mother called, mostly because I wanted to hear her try to justify it. She went right into it. "How could you do this to your sister?" She said it like I'd crashed a car. I said, "How could you uninvite me after taking my money?" Silence. Then this fake gasp, like she couldn't believe I'd say that. My mother loves acting shocked when you name what she's doing. She tried to twist it. She said my sister was stressed. She said it was a misunderstanding. She said I was overreacting. Then she did the classic move. She reminded me I was adopted, like I'd forgotten, and said they'd given me a home. She actually said, "After everything we've done for you," like housing a child was a favor. My sister got on the phone at some point, screaming. She said I was jealous. She said I was trying to ruin her happiness. She said I was always bitter and weird. She said I was a guest in the family, and I was acting entitled. A guest. After I paid for half the wedding, sure. I hung up. I blocked them for the night. I slept like garbage anyway. Over the next few weeks, I heard through a random cousin, not close, just connected that my sister still got married. But it was smaller, rushed, messy. People noticed. People whispered. My mother was embarrassed. My sister was furious. And instead of learning a lesson, they decided I was the villain in their story. Of course they did. I thought it was over. It wasn't. Because when you set a boundary with people who survive on violating them, they don't accept it. They retaliate. They scramble. They get creative. My sister decided if she couldn't have my money, she'd take my peace. 3 weeks after I canceled the wedding stuff, I had this weird hangover from it. Not the I partied too hard kind. The emotional kind. I'd be at work, staring at my inbox, and suddenly my chest would squeeze like I was about to cry for no reason. Then I'd get mad at myself for almost crying, which would make me want to cry more. Super healthy loop. Yes, I see the irony. I also had to deal with the financial side. People assume canceling means you get everything back. You don't. Some deposits were gone forever. I could afford it technically, but it still stung. Not because I missed the money, because it was proof. Proof I had paid for my own rejection. That is such a gross sentence, but it's true. I cut back for a while. I skipped little luxuries. I cooked at home more. I picked up extra hours when I could. Not because I needed to survive, but because I wanted to feel in control again. I hated that my sister's greed had touched my budget, even temporarily. Like she'd left fingerprints on my life. My fiancé tried to make it lighter. He'd joke, "Look at you. Your villain origin story is budgeting." And I'd laugh because it was funny, but also because it gave me permission not to collapse into shame. We'd sit on the couch with takeout containers and talk about what happened like we were dissecting a weird show. Except it was my actual childhood. That's when I finally started therapy. I'd avoided it for years because I thought therapy was for people with real problems. As if being emotionally neglected for most of your life is just a quirky personality trait. My therapist was this calm woman who didn't react dramatically, which, honestly, was the first green flag. She let me talk. She didn't rush me. She didn't tell me to forgive anyone. She just kept asking, "What did you need back then?" And, "What do you need now?" And I kept blinking like those were brand new concepts. I realized I'd spent most of my life trying to deserve care. Therapy was the first place I practiced receiving it without performing for it. A few months later, my fiancé came home from work and looked off. Not like bad day off. More like, "I'm trying not to show you something that's going to hurt you" off. He sat next to me, handed me his phone, and said, "I got a message." It was from my sister. She'd found his contact somehow, probably through my mother. They love being sneaky like it's a sport. The message was long and dramatic. She wrote like she was doing me a favor. She said she didn't want to get involved, but she couldn't stay silent. She claimed she had proof I'd cheated. She attached an old photo of me at a party from years ago, before my fiancé and I even met, with a caption that implied it happened recently. She even put a date on it, like she was writing a crime report. It was almost impressive how confidently wrong she was. I read it and I felt that old humiliation rise again. Not because I thought my fiancé would believe it. He wouldn't. But because my sister was still reaching into my life like she had a key. She was still trying to make me feel small. My fiancé looked at me and said, "This is fake, right?" Not accusing, just checking. I said, "Yes." Then I laughed, and it was this ugly laugh that scared me because it sounded like I was about to break. We sat there and went through the date she claimed. We were literally together that day. We had receipts, we had photos. We had the most boring proof in the world, real life. My fiancé was like, "Okay, so she's trying to mess with us." And I nodded because that was obvious. But it still hurt. And something in me snapped. Not in a violent way. In a clarity way. I realized my family wasn't going to stop. They were going to keep trying to pull me back into their chaos, because my role in their world was to absorb consequences they didn't want to face. I was the scapegoat, the buffer, the punching bag, the emergency fund, the emotional trash can, and I was done. So I did something petty. I did something I'm not proud of, but I also don't regret. Complicated feelings. Welcome to being human. During the wedding planning, I'd been at a fitting appointment with my sister. She'd stepped outside for a phone call. I followed a minute later because the consultant needed her to confirm something. And I saw her, my sister, kissing a guy in the hallway. Not her fiancé, a guy I didn't recognize. It wasn't a peck. It was a full-on, pressed-against-the-wall thing. I froze. Then I did the most unhinged thing. I pulled out my phone and took a photo. Not because I had a plan, because my body moved before my brain. Like I was collecting evidence in a case I didn't know I'd have to argue. I'd never used it. I'd never even mentioned it. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself I didn't want more drama. I told myself I wasn't that person. But after that message to my fiancé, I became that person. I didn't blast it publicly. I didn't send it to everyone. I sent it to one person, my sister's husband. I didn't even write a big explanation. I just sent the photo and said, "This was taken before the wedding. I didn't know what to do with it then. Now I do." And then I put my phone face down and waited, feeling like a monster and a victim at the same time. He responded hours later. One message. "Is this real?" That was it. No greeting, no small talk. Just shock. I wrote back, "Yes." Then I added, "I'm sorry." Because I was. Not for sending it, but for the whole mess. For being connected to it. The next day, my mother called from a new number. Classic. I answered because I wanted to hear what they were going to say. And she started screaming immediately. Like no hello, no preamble, just rage. She said I was evil. She said I was trying to destroy the family. She said I was jealous and vindictive. She said I could have talked to them first. As if they were reasonable people who handle accountability like adults. I told her calmly, "You tried to destroy my relationship with a lie." She said, "That's not the same." Of course she did. In their world, nothing is the same unless it benefits them. My sister left a voicemail that was pure chaos. Crying, yelling, blaming me for her marriage falling apart. Like I didn't physically push her into kissing another man. Like I didn't hold her lips to someone else's face. She said I was ruining her life because I couldn't stand seeing her happy. She said I was obsessed with her. It was like listening to a person argue with her own guilt in real time. From what I heard, her husband confronted her, and she denied it at first. Then she admitted it, but minimized it. Then she blamed him. Then she blamed stress. Then she blamed me for baiting her into it somehow. Yes, she really tried that. The creativity is almost admirable. He moved out. They started the divorce process. Nothing insane, just the normal messy paperwork and lawyers and figuring out who keeps what. My sister didn't have much because she'd been living in a fantasy where other people paid for things. She ended up back at my parents' house, which, if you've ever lived with a spoiled adult who's never had consequences, you can probably picture how that went. My mother called me again a few weeks later, suddenly calm. That's when I knew she wanted something. She said my sister was struggling. She said the debt from the rushed wedding was ruining them. She said my father was stressed. She asked if I could help because you're stable. Stable. Like it was a sin. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. I said, "You don't get to uninvite me from the family and then call me when you need a bailout." My mother tried to cry. She tried the soft voice. She tried, "We're your parents." I said, "You were parents to one kid. I was the other kid in the house." She got mad again. She said I was ungrateful. She said I was cold. She said I was holding on to the past. And I said, "No, I'm holding on to reality." After that, I blocked every number. I blocked every new number they tried. I deleted old emails. I changed settings on my phone. I told my workplace not to let anyone through. I did everything you have to do when the people hurting you don't believe they're doing anything wrong. And here's the part that doesn't sound dramatic but mattered more than the wedding cancellation or the photo or any of it. I started grieving. Not like crying in the shower every day, more like letting go. Letting go of the fantasy that my mother would wake up one day and love me the way I needed. Letting go of the idea that if I was patient and good, I'd finally earn a spot. I didn't earn it. I never did. And I never was going to. Then my parents escalated, because of course they did. It started with little things. My mother sent a letter to my apartment. Not a loving letter, a guilt letter. All soft language on the outside and knives on the inside. She wrote about family bonds and forgiveness and how hard it was for them. She never wrote the words, "I'm sorry." She never acknowledged the uninvite. She never acknowledged the money. She just talked about her pain like it was the only pain that counted. I threw it away. Then I pulled it back out of the trash because I was so used to second-guessing myself. Then I threw it away again. Growth, I guess. A week later, my father showed up at my door. My heart dropped when I saw him through the peephole. I hadn't seen him alone in years. He looked older, tired, like life finally asked something of him and he didn't know how to handle it. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He stood there awkwardly with his hands in his pockets and said, "Your mother is worried." I almost laughed. Your mother is worried. Like my mother was a weather system we all had to adjust to. I said, "What do you want?" He looked offended, like I'd broken some rule. He said, "We just want to talk." I said, "Then talk." He cleared his throat and said my sister was having a hard time finding work. He said they were struggling with bills. He said the debt was serious. He said, "We thought maybe you could help, just until things settle." I stared at him and realized he was asking me to subsidize the kid they always chose over me. Again, even after everything. Even after they told me I wasn't real family. I felt this old rage bubble up, but I kept my voice level. I said, "Why would I help?" He said, "Because we're family." There it was again. That word, used like a key they could shove into any lock. I said, "No." One word. Calm. Final. He frowned. He said, "You're being stubborn." I said, "I'm being safe." He said, "You're making this bigger than it is." I said, "You made it big when you let her use me and throw me away." He got this hard look and said, "You always hold grudges." And something in me just went quiet. because that sentence explained my entire childhood. They didn't see patterns. They saw complaints. They didn't see harm. They saw inconvenience. I told him he needed to leave. He stood there like he was waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. He left without hugging me, without saying goodbye, without anything. Just walked back to his car like he'd done his duty. After that, I started getting messages from extended relatives. Not people I was close to, just random connections. Your parents are heartbroken. Your sister is suffering. You only have one family. It was like a script they all read from. Nobody asked what happened. Nobody wanted details. They just wanted me back in my role. I learned to stop explaining. Explaining invites debate. I wasn't debating my own pain anymore. Meanwhile, my sister spiraled. She kept making new accounts on a social media app to message me. She'd send these long rants alternating between begging and insulting. One day she'd be like, "I miss you, I didn't mean it." And the next she'd be like, "You're miserable and you deserve it." It was exhausting. It was also kind of sad, because she had never developed any emotional muscles besides manipulation. My fiancé suggested we move. Not like run away, but get a different apartment, fresh start. And I hated that I needed to. I hated that my family could still influence my choices. But I also wanted peace. So we moved across town. New building, new routines, new sense of anonymity. For a little while, it got quieter. And then my mother tried a new angle. She got sick. When my mother left a voicemail saying she was in the hospital, my first reaction wasn't worry. It was suspicion. That probably sounds awful. But it's true. People who use emotions like weapons make you question every emergency. I didn't call back right away. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling my stomach twist. My fiancé said, "What if it's real?" And I said, "What if it's not?" Because that was my whole life, always calculating risk. A day later, my father texted, "She's being evaluated, it's serious." My brain did that thing where it flashes through guilt scenarios. Like, if she dies and I didn't go, will I regret it? Will I hate myself? Will people blame me? Will I blame me? It was like being trapped in a room with a bunch of versions of myself yelling. So I went. Not alone. My fiancé came with me and waited in the lobby because I didn't trust myself not to get pulled back into the mess. My mother was in a bed with that dramatic hospital lighting that makes everyone look fragile. She looked smaller, tired. Her hair was messy. For a second, I felt that old instinct to take care of her, even though she'd never taken care of me in the way that mattered. I walked in and she started crying immediately. Not quiet crying, performative crying, like she was auditioning. She said, "I didn't think you'd come." I said, "I'm here." She grabbed my hand and said, "I just want my family back." And I wanted to say, "Which family? The one you built around my sister? The one you uninvited me from?" But I didn't. I just sat there, stiff. A doctor came in later and explained it wasn't life-ending. It was scary, but manageable. My mother would need follow-ups and lifestyle changes and all that normal stuff. I felt relief. Then I felt annoyed at myself for feeling relief, because what a weird emotional whiplash to experience over a woman who treated you like furniture. Before I left, my mother said, "Can we start over?" And I almost laughed because, start over? Like we're rebooting a phone? Like decades of behavior can be deleted with one dramatic hospital bed scene? I said, "I don't know." That was the truth. I didn't know what to do with her. I didn't know how to be a daughter to someone who only remembered me when she needed something. For a few weeks after that, my mother behaved. She sent polite messages. She asked how I was. She didn't demand money. She didn't talk about my sister much. It felt suspiciously calm, but it also felt like maybe, just maybe, fear had softened her. Then, one afternoon, she called and asked if I could come over to talk as a family. That phrase made my skin crawl. But I agreed because apparently I enjoy emotional risk like it's a hobby. When I walked into my parents' house, my sister was there, sitting on the couch like she owned it, scrolling her phone, not even pretending to be nervous. My mother looked at me with this hopeful face, like she expected us to hug and cry and heal. My father stood in the kitchen pretending to be busy. My sister looked up and said, "So, are you here to apologize?" Apologize. Like I was the one who lied. Like I was the one who used someone's money and then uninvited them. I felt my face get hot. I said, "Apologize for what?" She smirked and said, "For ruining my life." There it was. Her whole worldview. Consequences are other people's fault. My mother jumped in fast, trying to smooth it over. "Let's all be calm," she said, like she wasn't the one who built this mess. My father finally spoke and said, "We need to move forward." Move forward. Another favorite phrase. Translation. Stop making us uncomfortable with your reality. I realized in that moment that the hospital scare hadn't changed them. It had just reminded them they needed their scapegoat back in place. And something in me just shut the door. I stood up and said, I'm leaving. My mother cried. My father sighed. My sister rolled her eyes. Nobody apologized. Nobody took responsibility. Nobody said, we were wrong. I walked out and felt like I was finally choosing myself in a way I hadn't before. Like not in a dramatic new me way. In a quiet, I'm not doing this anymore way. But my sister wasn't done. She found a new weapon, my job. A month later, my supervisor pulled me into a meeting and looked uncomfortable. She said, we got a complaint. My stomach dropped. Work was my safe place. Work was the one area where my family didn't have access. Or so I thought. The complaint was anonymous. It accused me of fraud, of stealing, of being unstable. It was vague enough to be scary and specific enough to raise eyebrows. My supervisor asked if I had any idea who would do that. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't want to drag my family into my professional life, but I also wasn't going to let my sister sabotage my paycheck. So I told the truth, not the whole childhood trauma story, just the relevant part. My sister was retaliating because of a conflict, and she'd been trying to contact me and cause trouble. My supervisor listened, asked a few questions, and said, do you have proof? I did. Messages, voicemails, the fake cheating accusation, the constant harassment. I had receipts because when you grow up in chaos, you learn to document everything. My supervisor forwarded everything to human resources. They took it seriously. They didn't fire me. But the fact that it even happened shook me. I felt violated in this new way. Like my sister had reached into my stability and tried to yank it out from under me. I filed a police report. Not because I thought the police would swoop in and fix everything. This isn't that kind of story. But because I needed a paper trail. I needed something official that said, this is harassment. The officer who took my report looked bored, but he did it. He gave me a case number. He told me to document everything. I was like, sir, I have been documenting everything since I was 5. Then I went to court and requested a restraining order. Not some complicated legal saga. Just a simple, basic request. Stop contacting me, stop showing up, stop messing with my life. I had evidence. I had messages. I had the complaint to my job. I had the report. It was enough. When my sister got served, she exploded. She showed up at my apartment building screaming in the parking lot. My neighbors watched from their windows like it was free entertainment. I stood behind my door and called the police. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. When the police arrived, my sister tried to cry and act like I was the aggressor. She said I was harassing her by ruining her marriage. She said I was obsessed. She said I was unstable. The officer looked at the paperwork, looked at her, and told her to leave. She left, screaming about how unfair everything was. My mother called later and said I was taking it too far. Of course she did. I got the restraining order approved. My sister had to stay away. She had to stop contacting me. She had to stop sending people after me. On paper, it was relief. In reality, it was still tense. Because people like her don't stop believing they're entitled. They just get quieter, sneakier. My mother shifted tactics again. She started telling people I was mentally unwell. She started painting me as unstable and paranoid. She told relatives I was holding grudges and making up stories. I learned this because random people would message me with this fake concern. Are you okay? They'd ask. Like I was the one who needed help, not the woman stalking me. I stopped responding. I stopped reading. I stopped feeding it. My fiancé and I started building a life that had nothing to do with them. We planned our own wedding. Small, quiet, no drama. We didn't invite my parents. We didn't invite my sister. We told ourselves it would be peaceful. And it was. Mostly. The part nobody tells you about cutting off family is that your brain still runs their software for a while. I'd be doing something totally normal. Paying bills, folding laundry, answering an email from my boss, and suddenly I'd hear my mother's voice in my head like a bad ringtone. Don't be difficult. Be grateful. Stop making things awkward. I'd catch myself shrinking, even when she wasn't in the room. It made me furious, like, wow, you moved out years ago and they still live in your nervous system rent-free. There was one day at work when a coworker asked if I was going to visit my parents for a holiday. Simple question, normal question. And I froze like she'd asked me to solve a math problem in front of the whole class. I mumbled something about maybe, and then spent the rest of the day spiraling in my head. Because in my family, holidays weren't cozy. They were like performance reviews. You show up, you try not to mess up, you leave feeling like you failed anyway. That night, I told my fiancé I didn't want to keep lying to people with vague answers. I wanted a script. A simple sentence I could say without shaking. He helped me practice. I know that sounds silly, but it helped. I started saying, I'm not close with my parents. Just that. No details, no apology. If someone pushed, I'd add, it's complicated, and change the subject. It was like learning a new language where the grammar is boundaries. My mother hated that I wasn't playing along anymore. She'd try to bait me through relatives. She'd say I was turning everyone against her, even though I wasn't talking to anyone. She'd say I was embarrassing her. She cared more about embarrassment than about harm, which honestly sums her up perfectly. I had this moment in therapy where I finally said out loud, I think they adopted me to feel like good people. And my therapist nodded like it made sense. And I burst into tears like I'd been holding that sentence in my lungs for decades. I kept saying, but they didn't mean to hurt me, because I still wanted to defend them, and my therapist said, intent doesn't erase impact. I wanted to frame that sentence and hang it on my wall. After that, I stopped trying to diagnose them. I stopped trying to figure out if my mother was cruel on purpose or just selfish or both. I stopped trying to figure out why my father never intervened. I stopped trying to make it all make sense because sometimes the explanation is just, they were like this. And the only thing I could control was how close I stood to it. I also started noticing how much I'd been compensating my whole life. I'd overwork, I'd over-explain, I'd over-apologize, I'd tiptoe around people's moods like it was my job. It wasn't. And every time I practiced not doing that, every time I let someone be mildly disappointed without rushing to fix it, I felt stronger. Not in a superhero way. In a boring, steady way. The kind that actually lasts. Our wedding was at a small venue, nothing fancy. Just a space that felt warm, with people who actually loved us. I wore a simple dress. My fiancé looked nervous in a cute way. My friends were buzzing around like protective little bees. I kept telling myself, this is mine. This is not their stage. Then, right before the ceremony, one of my friends ran up to me and said, there's a woman outside asking for you. I already knew. My stomach dropped like an elevator. I walked outside and there she was, my mother, standing near the entrance like she belonged there. She had this wounded expression on her face. She held a small bag like she brought a gift. She looked like she was trying to appear harmless. I could feel my body go into that old childhood mode. Brace, manage, survive. She said my name in this soft voice and said, I just wanted to see you. I said, you can't be here. She said, I'm your mother. I said, you're trespassing. My voice was shaking, but I meant it. She started crying. Again. She said she never imagined her daughter would get married without her. She said she felt excluded. I almost laughed because the irony was so thick I could choke on it. She excluded me from my sister's wedding. She called me not real family. She used my money. And now she wanted to play victim because I wasn't inviting her to watch me be happy. I said, you made your choice. She said, I was trying to protect your sister. Protect her from what? From consequences? From questions? From reality? My mother didn't answer. She just kept crying and saying she wanted peace. I told her she needed to leave or I would call the police. She looked shocked like I was being cruel. She said, on your wedding day? And I said, yes. On my wedding day. Especially on my wedding day. Because that day belonged to me, and I wasn't going to let her take it. My friend stood nearby, arms crossed, ready to intervene. My mother glared at her like she was a villain. Then my mother did the thing she always did when she couldn't control the narrative. She got angry. She said, you're selfish. She said, you'll regret this. She said, you think you're better than us. She said, you'll be sorry when you need family. I said, I needed family when I was a kid. It came out before I could stop it. My mother froze for a second, and for a split second I thought, maybe she'd finally hear me. Maybe it would land. Then she scoffed and said, you were always dramatic. And that was it. That was the confirmation I needed. I called the police. My mother left before they arrived, muttering under her breath about how ungrateful I was. I went back inside, fixed my makeup, and walked down the aisle. I got married. I smiled. I cried. I danced. I tried to stay present. But later that night, after everyone left and the adrenaline wore off, I sat on the edge of our bed in our little apartment and felt this heavy sadness settle in. Not because I missed my mother, because I finally accepted she would never be the mother I wanted. That version of her only existed in my imagination and in strangers' comments on a social media app. My husband sat next to me and said, "We did the right thing." And I nodded. We did. But right things can still hurt. Over the next year, my life got calmer. The restraining order held. My sister stayed away. My parents kept their distance. I built routines. I started therapy. I learned how to say no without apologizing. I learned how to rest without guilt. I learned how to stop waiting for a call that would never come. And then, weirdly, my parents' life started falling apart in the way mine always had. My sister, living with them, turned their house into a war zone. She demanded money. She blamed them for everything. She screamed, she cried, she threatened. She acted exactly like the daughter they'd raised. And suddenly, my mother wasn't smiling at the grocery store. Suddenly, my father wasn't nodding and pretending things were fine. They were calling relatives, complaining, asking for help, saying they didn't know what to do. And I heard about it through that same random cousin. It was almost poetic, except it wasn't satisfying. It was just sad. Because it didn't heal anything. It didn't undo the years. It just proved something I'd always known. The problem was never me. It was the system they built. One evening, my father called from yet another number. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice sounded small. He said, "We miss you." I listened twice. Then I deleted it. Not out of spite, out of self-preservation. Missing me didn't mean changing. Missing me just meant they wanted the version of me that made their life easier. About a year after the restraining order, I got invited to a cousin's birthday party. Not a close cousin, more like we share a couple family members and see each other every few years. I almost didn't go, because I didn't want surprise run-ins. But my husband said, "We can leave whenever you want." That mattered. Knowing I had an exit mattered. The party was in a rented community room with folding chairs and a table full of food. Very normal. Very people like us. I was actually relaxed for the first half hour, which should have been a sign something was coming. I swear every time I relax, the universe is like, cute. My mother wasn't there. My father wasn't there. My sister wasn't there. I started to think maybe this was safe. Then an older relative cornered me near the drinks and said, "Your mother is devastated." No greeting. No, "How are you?" Just straight to the guilt. I felt my jaw clench. I said, "I'm not discussing it." The relative blinked like she didn't understand. She said, "But she's your mother." I said, "Yes." The relative waited like that was supposed to make me fold. I didn't. She tried again. She did her best. I said, "Her best hurt me." The words came out calm, and I surprised myself. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't explaining. I just stated it like a fact. The relative got irritated and said, "You're going to regret it when she's gone." And I almost snapped. Instead, I said, "I already regretted it while she was here." Then I walked away. My husband found me a minute later, and I told him I wanted to go. We left. In the car, I cried. Not because the relative was right. Because it was exhausting being the only one willing to say the quiet part out loud. Everyone else wanted the illusion of family harmony, even if it meant sacrificing the person who got hurt. It's easier to pressure the reasonable one than to confront the unreasonable one. That's why scapegoats exist. A few days later, I mailed back a small box of childhood photos my mother had given me years ago. Not because I didn't want them, because I realized they were part of her story, not mine. She kept those pictures like proof she was a good mother. I didn't want to be a prop in her narrative anymore. I kept one photo, me as a little kid, smiling with missing teeth, holding a craft project like I was proud. I put it in a drawer. Not for her. For me. For the girl who kept trying. I wish I could tell you that after that, nobody ever bothered me again. But people did. They always do. In little ways. Yet each time it happened, I got a little quicker at protecting myself. Each time, I got a little less afraid of being seen as mean. Because honestly, if being nice means accepting abuse, then I don't want to be nice. I want to be free. And I am. Most days, I really am. Now, when people ask if I have family, I say, it's complicated. Because it is. I have a husband who feels like home. I have friends who show up and don't keep score. I have a life that's mine. And somewhere out there, my parents are still telling their story where they're the heroes and I'm the villain. Sometimes I wonder if my mother ever tells the truth when she's alone. Like, does she ever sit in silence and think, we messed up? Or does she just keep editing the story until she believes it? I honestly don't know. I stopped trying to understand her because understanding doesn't equal healing. The last time I saw my sister was in a courthouse hallway. She was there for something unrelated, maybe a hearing about a debt. I was there to renew my restraining order. We passed each other like strangers. She looked at me with pure hatred, and I felt nothing. Not rage, not fear. Just this emptiness where obsession used to be. That emptiness scared me at first. I thought it meant I was cold. But then my therapist said something that stuck. Indifference is a sign you're free. I didn't cry when she said it. I laughed. Because of course my freedom would feel like numbness at first. I'd been living in emotional noise for so long, silence felt unnatural. I still have moments. Like when I see a mother fixing her daughter's hair in public, or when someone talks about their sister being their best friend. I get this sharp little ache. Not jealousy exactly. More like grief for a childhood I didn't get. I let myself feel it now. I don't shame myself for it. I don't pretend I'm above it. Sometimes I also get angry at myself for falling for the wedding trap, for sending money, for believing the hugs, for being hopeful. But then I remember, hope isn't a character flaw. It's just dangerous when you give it to people who don't deserve it. My husband and I talk about having kids someday. That idea used to terrify me because I was scared I'd repeat patterns I didn't fully understand. But now I feel something else. Determination. Like, okay, I learned what not to do. I learned what love isn't. And I can choose better. I don't have a dramatic ending for you. Nobody got a perfect apology. Nobody had a big redemption arc. My mother didn't suddenly become self-aware. My father didn't stand up to her. My sister didn't learn humility. Life didn't tie everything with a bow. What I did get was quieter. I got peace. I got a home where I don't feel like I'm auditioning. I got a marriage that feels like teamwork, not survival. I got the ability to say no and mean it, and then go make dinner like it's normal. And maybe that's the real ending. Not forgiveness, not revenge. Just me, finally living like I belong in my own life. If you're waiting for me to say I never miss them, I won't. Sometimes I do. Not them as they are, but the idea of them. The family I kept trying to build out of scraps. That part of me still exists. She's smaller now. She doesn't run the show. But she's there. When she shows up, I do what I should have been allowed to do as a kid. I comfort her. I tell her she wasn't too much. I tell her she wasn't a guest. I tell her she deserved better. Then I put my phone on silent, hug my husband, and move on with my day. Because the best thing I ever did for myself wasn't canceling a wedding or exposing a lie. It was choosing not to go back.